The purpose for tonight's event is to give you, the voters, a chance to ask questions of the candidates on the issues that are important to you. So we'll begin this evening by giving each of the candidates 2 minutes to introduce yourself. And after that, we'll jump right to the Q&A portion. I'm going to ask the first question to kick it off, because I'm the moderator, I get to make the rules. So a couple rules for the evening. First of all, please silence your cell phones so there are no disruptions. For the audience, if you have a question, please raise your hand. I'll call on you. When it's your turn, please stand, state your name, where you're from, or where you live, and ask your question. I may repeat it so that it's picked up by GNAT because we're being filmed tonight. You can ask a question of a specific candidate, or you can ask the entire panel. If your question needs some context, you've got leeway to do that. However, we don't want people pontificating from the floor. So if I sense that you're doing that, we're here to hear from the candidates. I'm going to cut you off and ask you to get to your question. And lastly, if we've exhausted a topic, then I'm going to ask that we have no more questions on that topic so we can move on and cover more ground. Now for the candidates, please be brief so we can take as many questions as possible. There's no time limit, but if I sense that you've given a full answer and you're still going, we've got a red folder up here, so I'm going to ask somebody to hold it up, and that's your signal to wrap it up. If you feel a question doesn't pertain to you or to your office, you don't need to respond. Similarly, if the question is directed at a specific candidate, but you do feel it is relevant to you, please feel free to chime in. Okay? And with that, let's start with the introductions. George, you want to start?
Sure. So thank you everyone for coming out. My name is Gerald Malloy, and I am seeking to be your, I'm just going to get this working. Is that okay? Seeking to be your next United States Senator and to serve and represent all Vermonters. And I live over in Windsor County. My wife Stacey couldn't be here tonight, but we have 4 children. I have 3 children in Vermont schools. A little bit about me, I have about 42 years of what I consider relative experience in service, from West Point in the military, government service, and then business, providing services to government organizations, mostly in the Washington, D.C. area, which I think will be relevant to growing new business here in Vermont and growing well-paying jobs. My platform is about abiding by the Constitution, promoting economic prosperity, and ensuring defense, security, and order. I can tell you when Senator Leahy made his announcement, I was alarmed at the direction of the country was going, and that's only increased. And I'm looking to get back to fiscal responsibility, representing all Vermonters, not just a slice of Vermonters, and getting us back to abiding by the Constitution and spending taxpayer dollars much more wisely, to include attacking the debt, $31 trillion debt that we have, the inflation that's been brought upon us, and gas prices. So thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, Carol, and Tony, and Brian, and look forward to your questions.
Good evening. My name is Mike Taglavia, and I'd like to be your next Attorney General. My journey in politics began a couple of years ago with my representative, Samantha Fave, down in Orange County. I met her at town meeting and spoke with her. She had mentioned needing or wanting to have some help. I started attending meetings at the county level and at the state level, and 2 years later, I find myself being drafted and nominated to this position. I am originally from Long Island. I had a business on Long Island, then we moved to Maryland, had a business in Maryland, and then when we got sick of being chased out by urban sprawl, we moved to a nice little rural town called Corinth, Vermont. I live on gravel road on 115 acres in a log cabin off-grid, and I love it. I've been chasing rural lifestyle all my life, and I like it this way. I like traditional rural Vermont lifestyle, and I want to do my part to help preserve traditional Vermont. My platform is basically public safety, law enforcement, and the rule of law. I come across people almost on a daily basis who have been dealing with feeling like they are less safe than they've ever been, and I think common sense needs to be brought back into the argument. We need to have a bail system that works. So it helps to keep criminals off the street, or at least have some sort of deterrent value. So we can stop the small crimes that make us feel less safe, whether it be your catalytic converter being stolen, or your home being broken into, or something like that. But basic rule of law is where I'm going to go. I know that the Attorney General's office has many different divisions, but the criminal division is the one that I want to make sure is got the most that it needs to be able to deal with what's going on with the rising crime and drugs. The drug issue, not only addiction, but the crime that's caused by it, needs to be addressed to make everybody in Vermont feel safer. Thank you.
Thank you. Rick Morton, I'm running for Auditor of Accounts. If I passed out a card and you got one, it also says Vermont State Senator. One's a legislative role, the other is an executive role, and I would have to choose, if I was to win both, I would have to choose one or the other. That's a discussion for another time. I'm running for both. The reason I'm running for Auditor of Accounts is because despite the fact that it might sound boring and like, let's go on to the next guy, think of it this way. The IRS looks over our shoulder that we're filing all of our paperwork and we're reporting accurately and properly. The Auditor of Accounts is the IRS to the rest of government. We look over the rest of government's shoulder and make sure that they're doing what they should be doing. It's not an adversarial relationship, but it is a kind of a partnership, or it could be seen that way, where you look at what they're doing and say, is this really accomplishing the goals that are set out for this legislation or this procedure? And are there any recommendations we can make to improve the process to save money, deliver better services? And so the auditor actually can address any area of government in the state of Vermont, executive, legislative, and judicial. My background is in banking. I was involved in a local community bank in Brattleboro. I still live there for about 24 years. When I retired as assistant vice president, I was in charge of compliance for the bank and security for the bank. Compliance in banking is about the second most complex profession to be involved in compliance. The first, I imagine if I asked for a guess, somebody might say, healthcare? Yep, that's number one. But banking is number two, about 72 separate regulations. So we had to prepare for and handle audits. Audits. But I was the recipient on behalf of the bank of the auditors coming in and doing their work. And I learned a lot watching them do what they do. And so I'm thinking, wow, wouldn't it be kind of neat to flip the script and be the one who's doing the auditing instead of the one who's receiving it all the time? A little tongue-in-cheek there, but that's a little bit of what, because I recognize that you have to you have to prepare and work with the others that you're looking at. So I'm going to pass the microphone on now. Thank you.
Okay. It's working? There we go. I saw the lady with the red thing waving. What are the rules before we get started here?
Great, you have about 2 minutes to introduce yourself.
Okay, very good. I'm Brooke Page, and I'm from Washington, Vermont, the good Washington, not the bad one down south. And I'm running, there we go. I'm running for Secretary of State and State Treasurer. Now, primarily, I was interested in running for Secretary of State. And because I don't believe that any office should be unchallenged in the general election, I was willing to take back the treasurer position as well. As you know, I ran for 4 positions in the primary election because we have open primaries, and if somebody's not in every slot on the ballot, the rascally Democrats sneak over and write their candidates in. And if there's no published Republican candidate, then the Democrat wins the primary. And that's the end of the road. Anyway, so all of that's under the jurisdiction of the Secretary of State, who wears many hats in addition to elections, which we're going to circle back to in just a second. The Secretary of State is responsible for the Office of Professional Regulation, the archives, corporations, and I would say one other that the current, or the incumbent SOS has failed to deal with, and that's trying to provide civics instruction as part of the archives for not only school children, but also for adults to teach civics and governance, or at least provide information on that. So elections is where most of the trouble lies. As we've all recently experienced, our open primaries are subject to manipulation, even if we have a candidate in every slot. Mr. Madden proved that down south, things can go wrong. That folks that aren't Republicans can kind of slide over and support a candidate who maybe isn't a mainstay of Republicanism. And same thing happens on the Democratic side. Of course, the most famous ones are Pat Leahy, along with Fred Tuttle, back in 1995, and more recently in 2016 would have been when the Republicans ran nobody for U.S. House in the primary, and so Peter Welch was written in and won the Republican as well as the Democratic primary. Now, Mr. Welch, whether he was naive or just being snarky, immediately after the primary bragged, "Oh, I must be doing such a wonderful job. The Republicans even made me their candidate." So I hope we'll have an opportunity to talk a little bit more about OPR and the problems there, and the archives issues. And I'll get back to you.
My name's Joe Jervis, and I'm running for House of Representatives here in the Bennington 4 District, which covers Manchester, Arlington, Sandgate, and parts of Sunderland. I've been living in Arlington for the last 10 years. We moved here 5 months after my wife said we're never moving back to Vermont. But we love it, and we're not leaving. My background, I went to college, got a technical degree, went through ROTC at the same time, was commissioned in the Army, served in the Army Reserves National Guard for about 10 years. And then my professional career, worked in high tech, most of it in sales and marketing, primarily looking at things that have never been done before and finding solutions for them. So very complex problems and trying to simplify them and find solutions. And I look at the legislature, and that's a lot what we've got to do is we've got problems and we've got to find simple solutions for them. I'm running. I just felt this call that our state and our nation are drifting away from our constitutional roots, our Christian roots, and we need to, as Gerald was saying, we need to move back to the Constitution, and I want to help bring us back. As I've been out campaigning, people have said, wow, politicians at my door. No, I want to serve the people. I want to be a public servant. I think there's a difference there's a line there between being a public servant and crossing over into, politician part of the system. Primary issues, I see a lot of legislation that is just attacking symptoms and not problems. We need holistic solutions that attack the problem and not just throw a lot of money at symptoms and leave us with the problems at the end of the day. And then I've seen recently where Washington, the Republican Party's pushing a commitment to America, and it makes sense for us here in Vermont. Build a strong economy, have a safe nation, safe state, build that future on freedom, and have accountability in the government. And I think both Paige and Rick have been talking about needing more accountability here. So that's why I'm running, and that's what I'm looking to do. Thank you.
I'm Bill Giotti. I was born and raised here, and specifically in Manchester, and went to Burton, class of 1988. I've worked my entire career in Rutland and Bennington counties. My job experience has been split pretty much evenly between law enforcement and club management, which go hand in hand, as we all know. Currently, I'm actually working on the grounds crew at the Dorset Field Club, and still trying to run a campaign, working 12 days on and 2 days off, but we're making it work. I was married, I was with my wife for 30 years. Unfortunately, she lost her battle to ALS 2 years ago. We were blessed to have raised 2 children together, both of which went to Burton, both of which went on to college and are very productive parts of our society. And I'm very proud of both of them. My experience locally has been, I was on the select board. I live in the town of Mount Tabor now, and I've been in there for 40 years, but I was on the select board, I was on the school board, the local school board, and the district, Bennington Rutland Supervisory Union, all said for about 12 years. So I have a good understanding of how that system works, in some cases doesn't. And I've been a justice of the peace for the last 14 years. I got involved in this because I had a lot of concerns about the direction we're going in this state and the what would appear to be unsustainable path that we're on. And the fiscal responsibility seems to be something that's taken a back seat, and we're going to be looking down. I mean, we've become, unfortunately, a bit of very reliant on federal money. It's a double-edged sword to have a senator who sat in Washington for almost 50 years, and really, instead of this strong independent state that Vermont was known for hundreds of years, we became reliant on the federal government, and we're really going to feel it going forward when we don't have that money coming through that Senator Leahy was so quick to get for us. So we're going to have people in the legislature who are really concentrating on where the best way to spend our money is. And no red card yet?
Yep.
Good enough?
Good enough.
I just,
Good enough.
my big issues obviously are law enforcement. They're under attack in this by the legislature for, and we're really going to need some people up there who are going to stand for our law enforcement community and not go against them.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll move to the Q&A. The first question, which is for everyone. If you were elected, by what one achievement or accomplishment would you say you were successful in your office? So, Gerald, do you want to start?
I would start off by, I would say getting us back to fiscal responsibility. And I look at, when I made my decision to run, I was kind of alarmed at the overspending. That goes back to the beginning of last year. And that is, in fact, the reason that we have 40-year high inflation, and we are in a recession now because of overspending by trillions of dollars. It's just increasing the national debt to the point, as Bill said, it is absolutely unsustainable. And we're at the point now where I've heard someone use the term doom loop, where we're actually borrowing just to pay the interest on the debt we have, and that vicious circle is just a loser. The only way to get around that is to increase the GDP or increase taxes. Well, we don't want to increase taxes, and we're not increasing the GDP because we're in a recession now that we got placed into. So fiscal responsibility, and like Bill said, spending what Vermonters want to be spent on, not $80 billion on 87,000 new IRS agents, or $1 trillion long-term in terms so we can all pay back somebody else's student loan. So fiscal responsibility, I think, would be the top thing, because that's the future. This 31 trillion is going to drown our economy. We cannot keep going in this direction.
For me, it would be public safety. I want, once elected, to be able to hit the ground running and make it well known that their law enforcement will be given all of the funding and the training and support that it needs to make Vermonters safer than they are today. The drug addiction and the influx of drugs needs to be stopped. And one of the many ways we can do that is take the $100+ million that are going to be coming to Vermont through these big pharma settlements over the next 10 years, apply it to the problem, apply it to the drug issues, get law enforcement the equipment and the training they need, reopen, for instance, the Windsor facility and make it a place where if you are arrested for a drug crime, you get the treatment and the counseling and the training you need so that when you leave there, you will not find that you are depressed or feel a way that you need to go back to your old habits, that you can move forward, you can be productive, have a trade, feel a sense of self-worth so the drugs are in your past and they stay there. With regard to law enforcement, I did a piece in Vermont Daily Chronicle, and I want to make it clear, I think I also have it on my website, where I will not back any modification or reduction in qualified immunity. Police officers, law enforcement, sheriff, even any of the federal officers who are in this state operating need to know that if they act in good faith, that they will be protected. Otherwise, what's going on now is only going to scare off, intimidate any well-meaning, qualified personnel, any candidates from coming. I spoke to a law enforcement officer on the way here. I stopped and spoke to him briefly. And he said the situation that's going on is forcing him to consider retirement. I said, that's what I'm trying to prevent. If we have good law enforcement officers, we need to keep them.
Thank you. There's going to be a certain amount of just getting used to the lay of the land when I come into a new office. I want to take a quick survey over a few weeks and just take a look at the potential realm of audits that could be done in all the different departments, all the different levels, interactions with the federal government, interactions with state agencies, interactions with NGOs and other levels of government, such as town government and so forth. But the main thing I want to focus on, and this I think would go a long way to bring a little bit of peace in our country, in our state anyway, is to just verify that, in fact, we do have really good election integrity. So I would, among other things, focus on two levels. I'd be looking at the Secretary of State, and I'd also be I'd be looking at the people who are currently in that office and how they handle, because think about what we did. We changed the electoral landscape so that you now have 100% of those on the registration list getting ballots mailed to them more than 30 days ahead. You've got them now. I bet you have them in your house now, or you already may have passed them in. What about all those? I'm just going to give you two cases. Students who graduated from UVM who were able to register, and now they've moved on, and they're still on the registration list. What are the controls in place to make sure that they are not voting here unless they are resident here? And so that's what an auditor would do. Second thing, nursing homes. Think about the vulnerabilities there. You go into a nursing home, you're registered to vote, and no matter what your mental capabilities are, you're going to get a ballot. And it's going to sit on the bedside or someplace, and somebody's going to have to deal with it. So let's think about the best way to handle it. I'm not suggesting that we've got corruption. I'm just saying let's make sure that we can say elections are solid. So election integrity at the top, in the executive branch, but also in communities throughout the state. We have to target we couldn't do every town. There's 250 towns or something like that. We'd have to pick and choose and do so representatively, but that would be one of my goals.
stole half my thunder there. So, as to the Secretary of State's office, Rick's absolutely correct. We have to restore a sense of integrity to our elections. Jimmy Condos' "elections gone wild" is the most insane thing that could possibly happen. Other states have universal vote by mail. Every one of those states has voter ID and or up-to-date voter checklist with associated signature verification cards, so we can tell who has actually voted and sent their ballots back. I have a lot of folks that follow me on Facebook, for better or worse, and I asked them about, a few days ago, let me know what's going on with the ballots that are coming in. And I've gotten pictures of piles lying in apartment building foyers. I've gotten pictures of them being put in the magazine slots at apartments. I've gotten pictures from folks that are my friends who have moved away, whose ballots have followed them out to St. Louis, Missouri, down to Texas. You know, and the post office is not supposed to be putting forwarding labels on those. They're supposed to be returning them to the town clerk so they can be taken off the list. None of that is happening. Beyond that, let me say, absolutely, I believe that the town clerks and the boards of civil authority are the only thing standing between us and a totally destroyed election this fall. You know, there's just so much going on. We have yet to have any backstop for the ability of folks to become vote harvesters and go out to the nursing homes that Rick was talking about, to go around to apartment buildings and find orphaned piles of ballots. You know, they just want to help get back to the town clerk's office all neatly filled out and ready to go. And the other big thing, one of the biggest things in my mind, is we have what's called vote curing. But you can't cure ballot curing, but you can't cure your ballot. The legislature and the Secretary of State have so confused and commingled the terms ballot and certificate envelope that many people, I assume, including some of the folks on the Board of Civil Authority, aren't quite sure what the law is meant to say. Matter of fact, if you got your ballots today, or in the past couple days, take a look in the envelope and find the certificate envelope. Find the envelope that's labeled certificate envelope. It's not in there. They've now called it the ballot envelope. So then if you read the law and it's saying certificate envelope, and then it talks about the envelope for returning the ballot, you know, it's very confusing. What I think is the best thing is that we in fact have vote curing. I shouldn't really tell you this, but I'm in court right now in Orange County trying to get some of these issues resolved, even though I'm not the Secretary of State yet. I just, as a good citizen, I'm down there in the Orange County Superior Court, which is where the law says I have to go. And I just had oral arguments before Judge Timothy Tomasi on Monday, trying to resolve some of these things. What I think we should do, as a final backstop, since we're sending ballots out 45 days in advance, and some people are sending them back before they even know who the candidates are. I'm aware I busted on my time already. But let me just finish up by saying, what if you were allowed to go and cure your ballot for any reason? Now, the current law says, oh, if you didn't fill this out or that out, then I knew before you read it. But how about if you could go any time before or up to the end closing of the polls on Election Day, and if you think you've made a mistake of any kind, ask for your current ballot to be marked defective. You can't ask for it back. And ask to vote again. Okay? This would be real vote curing and would allow people who have made any kind of error to vote again. Remember that according to the Vermont Constitution, there is only one election day, and that's the first Tuesday after the first Monday. And if folks have been convinced to vote early, they should have a chance to fix that. I'm sorry.
So as a representative in the Vermont House, one of the challenges we've got coming into this current cycle is the fiscal hangover that we're going to have post-COVID. Over the last 2 years, there's been a tremendous amount of federal money that's come into the state. Some of this has been used to initiate new programs without a clue as to how we're going to fund them on an ongoing basis. We've got a program for meals in schools, great program. Are we ready in a recession to raise taxes to continue this program? Those are the hard discussions that I'm going to have to be a mouthpiece on, because we have to have fiscal responsibility in the state. We don't have the flexibility the federal government has of borrowing more money from the Fed. I recently wrote a piece that appeared in the Vermont Daily Chronicle and in True North Reports. How are you enjoying that new $600 a month tax increase? Inflation is a tax, and we want to remove that tax. We want to grow out of this inflation. So we need to have fiscal responsibility, and I think that's one of the focuses that would be a mark of success for my run in the State House.
I should probably back up, and I told you who I am, but not what I'm doing here. I'm actually running to be the state rep for the towns of Danby and Mount Tabor in Rutland County, and Dorset, Peru, and Landgrove and Bennington County. And one of the big driving forces behind why I'm here is I've been watching, as I said, with concern of what's happening, and I can only hope that we can flip some seats and give the governor's veto some teeth, because as I keep telling everyone door to door, the only way we get good laws and good policies in this state is if both sides are working together for the best results for everyone in Vermont. And that doesn't seem to be the case right now. And that would be one of the, I would consider a great accomplishment to get to Montpelier and be there to back the governor. If it was a veto that on an issue and I agreed with him, then obviously I would be right there to help sustain that veto. The qualified immunity that keeps coming up, that is also very concerning to me. That the fact that it was even put forward, and it's only against law enforcement community, it doesn't affect anyone else in the state government. And there's no time like now that we need to support our law enforcement. I said it in my opening, I'll continue to say it. And that issue hasn't been resolved. It has been moved to committee, so it's out there, and it needs to be addressed, and it needs to be stopped. And just one other quick thing is the issue. As I mentioned, I was on the school board for many years, and I find this very interesting with the Supreme Court ruling, and it would seem to be in conflict with the state constitution and of funding for students. And the legislature is really going to have to step up and take a role in this, and I would really like to be a part of that conversation.
Thank you. Mr. Benning, can you take a moment to introduce yourself? And also, in that, the question was, if you're elected, by what one achievement or accomplishment would you say you were successful in your office?
Thank you, Brian. Good afternoon, everybody, and I apologize for my tardiness. I left Montpelier 3 hours and 15 minutes ago, and believe me, the traffic coming down Route 7 is insane at the moment. And I also would normally have come in a jacket and tie, except at about 6:30 this morning, I was hanging off the overpass of I-89 at Williston with an 8-foot banner saying, "Please vote for Joe Benning." I am a state senator from the Caledonia County District. I have represented the Caledonia District for the past 12 years. I've served as minority leader in the Senate. I am currently the chair of the Senate Institutions Committee, and I'm running for the office of Lieutenant Governor against a guy that some of you may have heard. His name is David Zuckerman. usually pause there to wait for some snickering response about that name. I am answering the question about what I would look at for success should I be elected. Number one, I believe the governor needs to have someone who is capable of operating in sync and harmony. And the lieutenant governor's position is an ideal place for that to happen. The worst thing this state can face right now, with a substantial decrease in our federal funding, and let me pause to say we have just spent $8.2 billion for our budget. I'm guessing somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 billion of that is about to dry up. At this point in time, the last thing this state needs is two top constitutional officers at loggerheads with each other. And there is no question in my mind that David Zuckerman and Phil Scott would indeed be at loggerheads with each other. So my idea of success is to work in harmony with the governor. I, in fact, have worked in harmony with the governor. And to use one example, you may have heard of the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail, which is unique in the country. It's a 93-mile-long recreational facility taken from a former rail bed, and it's being turned into a year-round recreational trail. The governor had advanced the idea of completing it. On my Senate Institutions Committee, we kept the money in the Capitol bill to make that happen, and next month that trail is due to be finished. There are probably a dozen or more railroad bridge abutments that have been replaced. They are also replacing the bridges to make that all work. That will hum the economy in that entire section of the state. I could go on at length, but I don't know how much time I've got, and Brian, please do yank me off the stage here if that needs to be. I'm happy to answer any questions, and Carol, thank you very much for that red card.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you all. At this point, we'll open it up to the floor for questions. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Please.
Meyer,
Thank you.
Dorset. I'd just like to see a yes/no response on the Article 22 from each of the candidates, please.
Okay. Would each of the candidates please state your opinion on Article 22?
I'm going to vote no.
I'm going to vote yes.
No.
No.
No. No.
Okay. Next question. Eric.
Jervis from Manchester. I'm just curious how you address the $5 billion pension shortfall that the state has right now.
So, any of you gentlemen that would like to address that, feel free. And it can be more than one.
Okay. Well, the other position I'm running for is state treasurer, and I'm running against a fellow who has served with Beth Pierce, the current treasurer, for a couple years, and Mike Pichek. And before that, he was in financial regulation, where he, I guess, was asleep while the whole EB-5 thing slid right under his nose. But as far as the pension fund, since when Beth Pierce came in, we had a $2 billion deficit. This year, it's between 7 and 9, depending on who you talk to. Now, $2 billion of that was a accounting change that the federal government required. But even accounting for that, you still have over a $4 billion increase. And this primarily happened because Beth Pierce put on her rose-colored glasses each year to give the estimates of the earnings in the pension fund. She would regularly estimate $7 to $8 billion, and the regular return was between 4 and 5. And this gave the legislature the license to underfund the pension fund year after year after year. If you let's take the low number, $6 billion. And we remember that there are about 600,000 people in the state of Vermont. I think if you do a little bit of math there, you'll find out that it means every man, woman, and child has an obligation of $10,000 in the shortfall in the pension fund, okay? Now, we're all enslaved with that. Sadly, there's one easy way to get out from under the obligation, and that's to pick up your roots and move to Florida or Tennessee or Texas. You know, but what a terrible situation. You even have state employees who are recipients of the pension fund who are making that decision. They're still getting the money, but they're heading out of town because the burden is too great. I think that to answer your question, finally, I'm sorry about that, we need to properly fund not only the shortfall in the pension fund over maybe a 10-year period, but to restore it so that it's fully funded, so it doesn't represent any further, undue burden on the taxpayers. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Anybody?
Joe or Bill, would you like to chime in? Yeah, please.
Yeah, as we're addressing this, we've got to address it in the context of the overall fiscal situation of the state. You know, as Gerald pointed out, we've got about $2 billion of federal funding for our budget that isn't likely to continue. So, you know, that's a 25% haircut on the Vermont budget or increase in taxes. So as we're addressing this pension shortfall, it's got to be addressed with every other thing. So part of that gets back to, let's look at what we're spending money on. And if we're spending money on programs that address symptoms but don't get to the root of the problem, you know, I've been talking to people here in Manchester. We funded millions of dollars across the state for housing for the homeless, but we haven't put corresponding mental health or addiction programs alongside that housing. So, you know, you've got motels that have full occupancy, you've got crime that rose in that neighborhood because there's no program there, the people don't have purpose. We need programs that work. We need fiscal responsibility across the board here.
Okay. Would you like to say? Next question? Sir.
Good evening. Kirk Evans, Bennington. Two-fold question here. A couple of these gentlemen brought up qualified immunity for police officers. I think that we need to look at, in my opinion, a much bigger picture, is what events would produce a circumstance where an officer's qualified immunity was being stripped away. My understanding is an individual who, in the performance of their duty, basically abuses or denies someone their constitutional protections. So in my mind, if you're doing your job, if you've been trained and supervised to do your job appropriately, that shouldn't be an issue. The idea that I would have to say to myself, oh my God, this police officer is actually abusing my rights as an American citizen. He is using, he or she is using their authority as an armed individual to mistreat or deny anyone in this room their constitutional rights. And that is what I think we really need to look at.
So is the question, what are the instances where...
Right. I mean, that's what I'm saying, the whole situation, you just talk about qualified immunity. Qualified immunity was created by a judge. It's not even something that's created legislatively, which would mean the will of the people. It was an act as a judge or a judicial decision. And I'd like to know what you would do to ensure that police officers are educated, monitored in the performance of their duties so that they would not be involved in the type of activity that could result in qualified immunity being removed.
Okay.
I think first we need to remember that all law enforcement officers are sworn to uphold the Constitution of their state and the country. They also operate under a code of ethics, and they also in this state operate within the Vermont Criminal Code as well as the Civil Code. If they are found to have violated that, then they should be and would be held either criminally or civilly responsible. The qualified immunity thing, to the best of my knowledge, basically keeps an officer from having to have an attorney on retainer so that every other day, somebody isn't trying to file a lawsuit and tie that particular officer up in court. I understand what you're saying, but there are laws on the books in Vermont that apply to law enforcement officers. It's not as if they are out there acting without any guidelines. And I think we need to look at each individual situation and not paint with a broad brush. So I believe that qualified immunity must stay in place, and this is not the time, the political environment, to be trying to, it works as a way to deter qualified candidates from applying, and it also, like I said with this particular one officer I spoke to cause them to want to leave because they just don't feel like they believe they're losing their backing in the community and among the legislators. I hope that answers your question.
No, I don't. Thank you.
We'll get to everybody. Go ahead, Joe.
Okay. First, every senator serves on 2 committees. I chair the Senate Institutions Committee, and I've served for the past 10 years on Senate Judiciary. We dealt with this issue all session long. Qualified immunity is just that. It's not blanket immunity. It's qualified immunity. When we took evidence about why folks wanted to have this removed in the state of Vermont, the more we learned, the more we realized we didn't have an issue in the state of Vermont with respect to this. There are a lot of people who are fearful that we do, but the bottom line is we couldn't come up with anything to demonstrate the likes of George Floyd. Let me pause on George Floyd for a second, because this was the incident that really drove this entire conversation in Vermont. George Floyd had 4 individuals who literally killed him. All 4 of those individuals are in jail, the worst of those likely for the rest of his life. The city that employed those 4 individuals paid the Floyd family $47 million. No life is worth a given sum of money, I understand that. But the upshot was, for Vermont, we were using what happened there as justification for trying to advance a cause here. As an attorney, I'm a criminal defense attorney, by the way. Normally something like this would sound appealing to me at first blush, and it did. But the more I sat and listened to the evidence, I recognized our police officers were actually trying to do the best they could. And all of those agencies are imposing training seminars and forums to try to make police respond more appropriately to BIPOC communities, as well as every other minority committee that's out there and has been interacting with police in a way that is difficult. I will give credit to a guy named Mike Sherling, who was the former Department of Public Safety Commissioner. About 12 years ago, I was chair of the Vermont Human Rights Commission. He was the chief of police in South Burlington. An issue came before the Human Rights Commission that his agency was, in fact, stopping people of color in a disproportionate way. And nobody seemed to know why. Commissioner Sherling took it upon himself to develop data collection points that have now been incorporated into police training here in Vermont. This is the long way of telling you that at the end of the day of this session in addressing this question, we instead had a study committee formed to look into this and find out, is there really a problem in Vermont? And if there is, how do we best address it? So we are looking into the issue, but we didn't tell police agencies right now that you're going to have a bigger hurdle in front of you trying to recruit new police officers, and every agency testified that that was a problem.
Thank you. Bill?
You know, sir, I just want to address something that you slid in the area that personally I don't think you should have gone there. The issue of BIPOC whatever. My question or concern has nothing to do with race or social status of anyone. My observation and experience, and not a broad scale in Vermont, is police officers stopping individuals who they say are suspicious and demanding identification, punishing people or asserting their authority against people who basically say, listen, I'm an American citizen, I'm exercising rights, leave me alone, next thing you know, they're in handcuffs for resisting arrest or obstruction of operation. So the idea of automatically linking to my concerns to an issue of race or social status or whatever is completely out of context. Police officers are the only people who have the authority to deprive me of my freedom on their own. 2 o'clock in the morning, boom, they decide I'm going to sit in jail until a judge deals with my issues.
Sir, is there a follow-up question?
Well, my question is, I think that we need to look at this as not an issue of race, but an issue of legality and authority or misuse of authority. One officer mistreating one person is one too many. And we all know what the road to hell is paved with. And because somebody had good intentions does not mean they were doing something good and deserve to be protected by the system.
Thank you.
I just want to quickly respond and say, I don't necessarily disagree with you, but getting that study in place was important to develop the very evidence we're talking about.
Thank you. Next question. Oh, did you want to say anything? Okay.
Police person answer the question.
I'm not sure there's an answer to it. Anyways, all I'll say, follow-up, is that we, and Joe Benning just answered this as well as it can be answered, but the training in this state is as good as anywhere, I would argue, and that the misconception of the qualified immunity needs to be cleared up. That it's not, as was already stated, it's not blanket immunity. And what we must be very cautious of is making this a place where good, qualified people don't want to come work. Because we've seen what's happened across the country in larger cities that need bodies, and the qualifications, they lower the qualifications needed to get the job, and they forego polygraphs and so on, and you get people who should never have a badge on their chests, and then that just leads to more issues. So I would argue that the training and the qualifications that are in place in the state of Vermont are as high as anywhere in the country.
Thank you. Rick, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to mention in another forum just earlier this week, the issue of understaffing of police departments throughout the state of Vermont, but also in Windham County, was an extremely significant concern. We talked about housing and a number of other things. But if we modify this immunity for police officers, as I understand it, every public official has a certain degree or kind of immunity like that. To pick just one role sends a message, and how are we going to draw people to the state of Vermont? Because we're going to stand out as the one place, well, maybe not the one place, but we're going to stand as a place that we're not really, we don't have the back of our police officers. And we're going to have worse problems staffing our police departments. And then this issue that was just mentioned there of having to compromise the values in order to get bodies in there to really cover the beat. That would be a concern to me, just as a citizen, just not for my role, but just as a citizen.
Could you pass the mic down to Joe?
Thank you. I just want to add a couple of things. Thank you for the question, Clark. So 10 months campaigning, and what I'm hearing from Vermonters across the state is three main issues of the economy, crime, and drugs. And what I think have caused, for instance, the crime issue is going back to defund the police movement seeking to actually fully remove, because that's what the George Floyd Act said, fully remove qualified immunity. And I've talked to many police, retired and active police officers. For instance, the state troopers here, they're 80 troopers short. They're short across the state. And the reason is because Congress has tarnished that image of being a police officer. So like we've talked about, people don't even want to become a police officer, and they're understaffed right now. I think I look, and I think everybody in this table does, looks to actually support the law enforcement community. Derek Chauvin was a bad person, and Joe talked about it. He's in jail. That's exactly where he belongs. And qualified immunity doesn't protect you against committing a crime, as we've talked about. But Congress decided to do that, and I would add on top of that the progressive prosecutor movement. So between those two, Burlington, Brattleboro, Bennington, we have a crime crisis right here in Burlington. Who would have thought that? But we do. So I want to support the law enforcement community, and I think that needs to come from this U.S. Senator on down and citizens, because like I said, I talk to people in Bennington and Brattleboro. I don't like to go out at night anymore. I mean, that's not Vermont. So,
Mike?
Mike Malls, Sunderland. One of the questions I'd like to ask all of you is, since the pandemic, Vermont has been the recipient of billions of federal dollars, also known as your local tax dollars, just to a different revenue. That in and of itself has contributed in many ways to housing shortage and employee shortage. People don't want to work because they get paid to sit home. Housing is not available because the state is putting people up in housing and paying for it, which they're eventually rolling back because that's running out of money. My question to the folks here tonight, what are the plans, or what are your plans? Are you going to supplant these federal dollars with local tax dollars when these programs dry up? How are you going to keep paying for these people that are in motel rooms? It's my understanding the state has no plan when that rolls out. Where is that money coming from? Is it your intentions to keep these programs funded on local tax dollars, or just let them go away like they were before they ever became what they are now?
Who wants to jump in first?
Thank you. As I talked about earlier, I think, well, it is, going back to economics and money supply, we've had massive reckless overspending, and we cannot keep going down this path. So I am looking to have a balanced budget, and that's going to require some tough decisions. I talk about career politicians not wanting to make those tough decisions, but I will make those decisions, and it's going to take looking at the entire revenues and what the government's taking in and making tough choices. But we can't keep going on this overspending because, as I mentioned, it has led to the inflation and recession that we're in now, and there's got to be some accountability for that. In terms of the infrastructure and getting people back to work, the state's got to get some issues there. I mean, we have Manchester, for instance, we have the city, there's some infrastructure in the city, but to build out beyond that takes infrastructure, exactly what you said, and that's going to be kind of a joint effort, I think, between the federal government and the state government to make those decisions to do that, to support it, to include, because that's how housing will happen once you build that infrastructure. Unfortunately, I think we've dug a deep hole here. So we've got to first stop the overspending. We cannot keep going down that path, and then reevaluate what we do. What our government does spend of taxpayer money, because a lot of it, I think, has been even our part. People talk about that being the recovery plan. I even heard Secretary Yellen a few days ago talking about that supported the recovery of the country. maybe more than half of that was pet projects, and that has not supported the recovery of the country. That has supported the country going into inflation and recession because it was massive overspending. So we've got a leadership issue that has to be addressed first to get us back on track with some fiscal responsibility.
Mike, I'm going to disagree with you on one point immediately. That was not our tax dollars. That's tax dollars coming from Florida and Texas and California, because this state has managed to wind itself into a welfare state living off the federal government. I think the people who founded this state would be absolutely appalled at that idea. And let me say, I'm running for the office of Lieutenant Governor. I cannot draft legislation in that position. I cannot go into committee and vote on it. But as Lieutenant Governor, I can support the person at the top who understands this problem very well, and we're staring at a train coming through a tunnel directly at us. We can't sustain what we have technically enjoyed. As much as many people want to, it's just not possible. So the tough decisions that are coming down the pike are going to have to be worked on by people who are in unison with how they feel about this problem. I said earlier, I'm a criminal defense attorney. I've been at it for 40 years. I'm not speaking from some high plateau looking down on poor people. I work on a daily basis with poor people who've been involved in our criminal justice system. What has disturbed me is I'm now witnessing 3 generations of people who have lived off the public dole because that's the only way they know how to survive. And I'm not trying to cast aspersions on them. I'm just trying to say, you cannot continue to sustain a generation after generation after generation of people who do not know and understand how to make their way in the world. That requires tough decisions. I'm hoping our federal representatives are going to recognize they can't be sending us chunks of money that they technically don't have either. They can print it, but that's being irresponsible to our grandkids. So at this point, I want you to know, at least Phil Scott and I are looking at this very seriously and understand we just cannot sustain what we've been trying to do.
As Attorney General, I don't think I'm going to be able to do anything to affect the legislation. I just fear that if things don't start turning around and we don't get the spending under control and we have more inflation, the Attorney General's office is going to be dealing with other issues because of it.
The auditor's role is to try to find places where money's being wasted or inefficiently used. So the best I could contribute as an auditor would be to hopefully find resources, but this is around the edges. It's not going to be billions of dollars. It's going to be a much smaller number than that. That's about the best I could offer in that role.
If I could just respond to the Attorney General's candidate's thing. I think there is something here. And that's something that you could do would be to investigate the massive welfare fraud that takes place within the state of Vermont. Between the state auditors and the state controllers and the people that look at those purse strings. Nobody watching that money source. And Vermont is one of the very few states that doesn't have a hotline where you can call in welfare fraud or abuse. And what's happening is you've got that agency run by the Department of Human Services who doesn't want to acknowledge that they have a significant problem in this state and they're refusing to investigate it.
Well, that would be something that would definitely be worth looking into.
And I will ask the people here in the audience tonight, when is the last time any of you people heard of anyone in the state of Vermont being prosecuted for welfare fraud?
Well, that should definitely be looked into. Thank you.
State Treasurer, there are millions of dollars that have been earmarked for all of these pet projects, but it's not been spent yet. And I think that the one thing I could do as treasurer is identify those funds that are still available and sequester or quarantine them to not be sent out and be applied towards important essential services or to help backfill the pension fund rather than dispersing them, and look at any funds that have been sent out already but have not yet been spent and look to claw back those funds that aren't already fully committed. And that's about all I've got as far as treasurer.
The can gets kicked down the road, and Bill and I get to pick up the can. It's going to be a tough legislative session. There's some real problems here that we have to address. I think one of the opportunities we have is government has grown, and taken responsibility from other entities. So when you look at the homeless population, when you look at drug addiction, are there community partnerships that can be developed that the community funds that are much more efficient at this? Anytime we put government in it, you have all sorts of administration and you're spending all sorts of money just administering things without providing services. We look at what's going on with our schools and how many more administrators there are, and that cost of administration versus the cost of instruction. I was seeing something yesterday on universities, and it was like direct instruction was less than 25% of the overall school budget. No wonder tuition's out of control. So are there alternatives where we can partner with community, with churches, with other entities that can provide some of these necessary services, but not do it at the price tag that we've been doing it through government? We're going to have a tough legislative session looking at what have we been spending money on and where should that money be spent, to address this haircut we've got to go through.
Well, obviously, having never been up there, I first have to learn how it all works, and we know it doesn't work well right now. But all I can see is I can imagine myself being there, supporting the governor and his vetoes on bills that would strap the average Vermonters with more taxes. And he's been doing that along, and we really just need to have enough numbers in the seats up there to stop some of this out of control spending.
Thank you. Next question, Sylvia. And then we'll go back.
Sylvia Joe at Manchester. I have a lot of questions, but I'll try to be just selective, and I hope I don't
Pick one.
Pick one. But with the courts, why is our court system so convoluted? And it drags things on for years. I was assaulted 3 years ago. The situation occurred at my back door. It's July 16th, a sunny day, a warm day. I was doing gardening work. I'm trying to skip some details. I was through at 8 o'clock. It was bright out, light out. I was hungry and I had back pain. So I'm walking up my driveway to get to my back door. I always keep my house locked, the interior door.
Sylvia, is the case still dragging on?
It is.
So is your question, why has it taken 3 years?
Yes.
Okay.
I got hit on the head. I was lucky I wasn't killed. But anyway, emergencies, operations, rescue squad and police came almost instantaneously. The fellow was held by my back door because of my screaming and yelling. But this case has gone on for 3 years. I have no information at all about what is happening to this young man, 20 years old. He was arrested immediately, $10,000 bail. His grandfather from Florida came up with $1,000, so he was released immediately. And he's still wandering between 3 states.
Does anyone want to jump in on this?
Nothing is justified.
I'll let Joe in a minute. I've spoke with a couple whose son had an issue at the Tunbridge Fair. They told me a story. First thing I can say is justice delayed is justice denied. I don't know exactly why your case or even this other person's case was delayed, but if we keep up, and the COVID situation made it even worse, way worse, so we need to get the courts moving back. I know there is a backlog. I will have to look into it if I am actually elected, but I understand. You see it almost every day. People are frustrated because they don't see, you feel like you're getting justice?
Hey, there's 10 felonies before mine. 10.
Yeah.
And they're going on beyond mine.
This is why I mentioned something about the revolving door of the bail system. The message, what's the message you're getting? You're getting the message that the court system doesn't care about you. And it's wrong. I agree, it's wrong.
That's why the police have the problem they have.
Yes, that's why I'm here. I'm not a politician. I'm not a lawyer. Vermont says I don't need to be. I hope to bring common sense to it. I'm sure I have a huge learning curve, but I'm up to the task. I need your vote. I sympathize with you.
I'm just saying, that's
Thank you for your
the
comment. Thank you.
Another issue.
Okay, no, Sylvia, you only get one. Sit down, please. Thank you.
Sylvia, I just want to answer your first question. COVID-19 shut the court system down for over 2 years. It's not right. There are people now sitting in jail who have claimed their innocence, who have also been waiting for those trials to recommence. This past Monday, I drew a jury on a 2019 case. What I normally have for about 30 to 40 cases in my filing cabinet in criminal court have reached 150, and they're all backed up. You do have the right, however, to have information about what the state knows with respect to your perpetrator. There is an office called the Victims Advocate Office. If you have made communication and have failed to get answers from that person, you can and should take it up the ladder to get answers to the questions, because they do have a hierarchy and they have to respond to that hierarchy.
Thank you. Gentlemen in the back. No, we've got a question in the back. You're welcome to talk afterwards. Okay. Sir.
Hello, Giotti, Manchester, Vermont. My question concerns how we get back to the country we knew before the pandemic. The unconstitutional lockdowns, the vaccine mandates, and the issue around vaccine injury, and possibly the financial obligation the state of Vermont will take on the people who have been injured by vaccines. I would say broadly, I think the generic ballot is +5 for Republicans this year because a lot of people like me who are former Democrats and progressives who are completely upset over the lockdowns and the vaccine mandates. So I'd like to hear what you think broadly about it. Should Dr. Fauci be in jail? And I want this to be for fun, but how do you feel about the vaccine mandates for one, financial obligations for the vaccine injured, and would you agree to lock us down again?
Great questions. Who wants to jump in?
I would not agree to lock you down again, ever. If we can't learn from following the science, then we can't learn anything. I don't believe that we should have vaccine mandates. I thought we had HIPAA laws in this. I shouldn't be able to, no matter who I am, ask you if you've been vaccinated. Pardon my French, it's none of your damn business. And that's how I feel. We are free Americans. We have what we call the internet. We have learned a lot since day one, since the first time we agreed to only 2 weeks to, flatten the curve? Instead, it flattened our economy. As a chief law enforcement officer, I will not be in favor of any mandates. Besides the fact that mandate is a mandate and a law is a law, and there is a difference.
Thank you, Mike. I'm in the same position. I disagree with all of the mandates, and I think they were unconstitutional, and I look to get into the U.S. Senate and start enforcing the Constitution and constitutional rights of all Americans and all Vermonters. I guess to let you know, people ask me, about President Trump, and there were two things I didn't like about President Trump. I think the mean tweets were too much, and I think he should have fired Anthony Fauci.
If I heard your question correctly, I heard you say that you were a former Democrat or progressive.
Correct.
You already know the answer to your question. You vote Republican.
I got the mic for a moment. I think this is a recommendation to the legislative guys at this end of the table. When you get in there, take a look at the statute that authorizes Governor Scott to declare a state of emergency. And then consider ways of modifying that so that after, let's say, 90 days, he has to come to the legislature to extend it. Because no one anticipated a 2-year pandemic. We were thinking ice storms and fires and mudslides and floods. And those get over in a couple of weeks or a month or two. So if I was in the legislature, I'd be looking at that. Not to shut them down, but to just slow them down.
Sadly, many people viewed COVID as an opportunity. People in school boards, people in elections, people who didn't like Mr. Trump, all saw this as their shining star to get what they wanted in place. I'll leave the Trump issue and I'll leave the school issue for others to discuss. But in elections, Jim Condos, who's the current Secretary of State, had longed for being the champion of universal vote by mail. And so he saw this as the great excuse to get to do it once and then say, oh, look how wonderful it worked, and let's do it again. Oddly, if you look at the law carefully, it didn't say that he was allowed to mail out the ballots. It said that the town clerks were to mail out the ballots. And even after they changed the law, where at first the governor was supposed to go along with this, and remembering that the Secretary of State actually is a subordinate of the governor, the Secretary of State is commissioned by the governor, according to the law. Condos went and did it anyway, even though the legislature told him not to. And so now we have all manner of the troubles that universal vote by mail causes, including the fact that in Vermont, Jim Condos said, oh, it's racist if we have voter ID, and we don't have up-to-date voter checklists, and we now have the two wicked children of universal vote by mail. The mystery ballot boxes on the street corner, when every town has numerous U.S. post office boxes, which if you fuss with things going in there, there's a $15,000 fine and 5-year federal penalty, and the little Vermont boxes have no penalties attached to them. And the other wicked child of universal vote by mail is vote harvesting. Now, some people have said, oh, but vote harvesting allows, handicapped people and sick people and homebound people to be able to vote. Well, under our current law, the law before COVID or before 2020, the law says if you have a problem, you contact the town clerk and 2 justices of the peace will come out to your house with the ballot, help you fill it out, and take it back to the ballot box for you, okay? All of this chaos in elections needs to be rolled back. In 2019, before we had any of this, our elections were considered the most available and open and most secure in the country. That will never be said again until we get back to what the laws were in 2019. Thank you.
I think there's one other aspect to this conversation was the egregious removal of our free speech. I lost my brother-in-law to COVID. The last text message I sent to him was, Mike, I can get you ivermectin. Could I put that up on Facebook? No. Science for any disease says you look at prevention, early treatment, hospital protocols, and possibly vaccines. What did the pharmaceuticals drive? Vaccines and a death protocol in the hospital that killed my brother-in-law and simultaneously on the same day killed my mother. I do not support these lockdowns. There were many constitutional rights that were egregiously run over during this pandemic.
Well, from my standpoint, I was affected as I was the general manager of Rutland Country Club at the time. So from a business standpoint, I saw the effects that were on the business aspect of it. Clearly, we've seen what's happened with the school system and the effect that it's had on our students and the kids and their mental health. And unfortunately, my wife was dying during the height of the pandemic, and there were periods of time when the only way that we could see each other was through FaceTime, because I wasn't allowed into the hospital. So, I definitely have felt the effects of everything you're talking about, and I certainly would look into what we could do moving forward to limit the powers.
Yes, ma'am, in the back.
Goodwin, Grafton, Vermont. I'm a select board member and a school board member. I guess it's Mr. Page. I just want to do a shout out to Grafton. We do the ballots, as you say. We have JPs that go out and get the ballot and bring it back to us. How do you monitor other towns that should be doing this? And we, every 2 years, should go through the list, the checklist. So I'm very proud of what we do in our town. Yes, it's only 700 people, but there's got to be a responsibility with the other towns.
Absolutely. The little town I live in Washington, we have 1,000 people. So, like you, I'm sure you don't have the evil tabulators in your town. You just do manual hand counts. And somebody pointed out to me recently, the entire population of Vermont is about a quarter of the population of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And why we can't avoid all of the technical intrigue and go back to just counting our marked ballots by hand would maybe take a little longer. But the one thing it would do, it would give all of the naysayers and all of the doubters in the competency and the integrity of our election, it would put all of that to rest. Now, I am uncertain that the legal standard is, are the errors, omissions, and frauds sufficient to change the outcome of the election? I'm unsure that they are. But the one thing I'm sure of is the 20 or 30,000 Vermonters who have become so disenchanted that they no longer vote is a significant problem. And we need to get to a point where there's pride in voting. And one of the prides that you would have is for everybody to have a voter ID card, something that would be give them a sense of belonging, a sense of pride, and a sense of responsibility to get out and vote. Does that cover it?
Can I add to that just a little bit? So on the federal level, I am in favor of voting reform. And as Brooke was talking about, it bothers me greatly that there is the perception that maybe your vote doesn't count or didn't count. So I want to reduce that absolutely as much as possible. Some things I'm in favor of is to get rid of the machines, paper ballot only, voter ID, only by very limited exception, in-person voting only, and even make it a national holiday. So it bothers me, that's your power as a citizen to exercise your vote and let your voice be heard. And there is a perception out there that maybe my vote doesn't count. I can't stand that. So.
Hey, gentlemen, I'm going to shift gears and ask an education question. In 2019, which is the most recent year for which statistics are available, reading and math proficiency scores for Vermont 4th and 8th graders ranged from 37% to 40%. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, Vermont spends an average $20,838 per pupil, the 4th highest in the nation. From your position, what can you do to improve the education system in Vermont? Because 40% is just not acceptable.
I'll go first.
I'll go first just because my answer is short and easy. One thing that the current state treasurer, who's my Beth Pierce, has been to get involved in personal finance education. And I think that's something that we should have in the schools so that children learn how to manage their money. They understand the importance of money and of earning money and hanging on to the money. That would be a significant improvement. Also, as I've already said, under the Secretary of State's office, Jim Condas actually discontinued the educational aspect of his office. And I think it's important that the next Secretary of State establish an individual responsible specifically for civics and Vermont history education.
And that time to think it all through, I was trying to listen. No, that's fine. That's fine. Obviously it's an issue. I don't know what the answers are, unfortunately. I wish I had a silver bullet for this one. All I know is 81% of my property taxes go towards the education fund. That is obviously a big problem when the numbers are what they are. So whether we need better guidance at the top, whether it's an issue of well, I know it's an issue from my time on the school board, unfunded mandates, and that leads to unintended consequences. And as a school board member, I saw it happen several times. We would get money from the federal government again, and for a grant, for a program, and no one would look further than the 2 years that grant was going to be good for. And nobody took into consideration what that was going to do to our local budgets going forward if we were going to continue those programs. And maybe that's one place that really needs to be scrutinized, is what programs are being paid for right now out of taxpayers, local taxpayer money that didn't exist before, and are those programs seeing the results? And clearly in some of these cases they're not. So those need to be reviewed.
I was trying to give Bill a chance because I always grab the mic before him. You said 4th grade and 8th grade, and I had an 8th grader serving me ice cream and had trouble counting change. I mean, it's a functional problem. I think one of the things we've got to look at is what's going on in the schools that shouldn't be going on in the schools. I've had parents in Manchester say, what's with these furries in my children's classrooms? Kids that think they're animals and can meow during the class and disrupt the instruction. Back in my day, you used to be sent to the principal's office. Now you get a litter box. Other parents saying they're not happy about the critical race theory that's being pushed in school. We were all created equal. We need to focus on the basics in the instruction, and we need to make sure that our legislation guides the schools that they need to focus on the basics.
Just real briefly, Joe, I agree with you on parents deciding what is taught to their children. I make those decisions with my wife about what is taught to my youngest, who's 13, but 10, 11, 12 being taught some subjects. I just don't think he needs to hear that, so I actually pull him out of some classes. I guess I have heard on the campaign trail quite a few times to get rid of the Department of Education. I am going to look at that. I know that I am supportive of school choice, and I think, you know, public schools and the amount of layers, and I think this is worthy to look into the union relationships with the schools, which is, you know, I hear enough times it's not helping. It's increasing the cost dramatically. So just some things, I don't have firm answers on those, but definitely things we're going to look at.
From this position, I won't have too much influence, but I can speak just as a taxpayer. I graduated in 1981 from high school. That was before Jimmy Carter's Federal Department of Education got its hands on the education system. I got a pretty good education. I think the Federal Department of Education needs to be shut down. Everything needs to be local. It needs to be, I don't even think the state should have a major role. I think it should be in the counties. We had much better schools and much better test scores when that was the case. And like Gerald mentioned, school choice vouchers. I'm a business guy. My quality was up. It had to be up if I wanted to stay in the business and run in the black. That's how you improve the education. Competition.
So I've served 2 terms on a school board. My wife and my mother were teachers. I went through 12 years of Catholic schooling, and then I went on to a public college and a public law school. This is not a silver bullet per se, but I know that all through my educational experience, my parents were directly involved. And it may not be a famous silver bullet, but it is a bullet if we don't get parents and grandparents back involved with children. We're never going to solve this problem. And part of the obstacle to my wife today is that kids are coming into her classroom that don't need to worry about math and science. They need basics, like mental health facilities, and parents who are responsible instead of being irresponsible in how they're being raised. The point of my comments is we have to get parents and grandparents back involved in the educational process.
Just one more comment. When I was in school, everybody, I guess they still have parent-teacher conferences. My parents would both go. We'd be with them. My father would introduce himself, and as soon as he finished his last name, he said to every teacher, without fail, including the principals, if he steps out of line, you have my permission to smack him. None of my teachers ever had to smack me. In fact, all of my teachers and the high school principal, and the one time I actually got sent to his office, looked at me and said, I know there's nothing I can do to you that's going to equal at all what's going to happen at home, so don't let me see you here again. So Joe's correct.
I just want to quickly add, if parents actually showed up today to parent-teacher conferences, we'd be half a step toward the right direction.
Yeah, my name's Kathy Wagner, I'm from Sandgate, and what I see is children now are being taught an ideology rather than what they really need to live and survive. And with all this gender identity and total confusion on little kids who should just be playing with their mates and whatnot, it's destroying them mentally, which I think is the goal. They're ruining the family by letting kids get puberty blockers or transgender surgery without parental permission. That's absolutely insane. And people need to get, you know, the parents need to investigate because a lot of this is hidden from them.
Kathy, do you have a question? Because if you don't, I have one that's related to that topic.
Okay, go ahead. I just want to present, there's something you've got to deal with.
So as you may know, Randolph High School recently made national news for kicking the girls' volleyball team out of their own locker room because a transgender student who was on the team, the girls didn't appreciate changing in front of him. So the question is, from your position, what will you do to protect the rights of women and girls and the rights of parents to have a say in their kids' education.
I just
The other bit of news is the Agency of Education for Vermont just came out recently and said it may be against the law for administrators to inform parents about their kids' gender identity at schools. So to your point about getting parents involved, they're trying to drive a wedge between the parents and the schools.
Oh, that's by plan.
And so the question is, what can you do to support parental rights and also to support girls and women?
I'm running for treasurer and secretary of state. So I will do what I can as a citizen. I did want to say something Kathy inspired me to say. We have decided, or someone decided, to destroy the age of innocence. I think back to when I was 6 or 8 or 10 years old. You know, this wasn't even in your wheelhouse. These weren't even considerations. And the fact that the children had all of these thoughts and images and ideologies stuffed into their minds is child abuse. It is child abuse. It's contributing to the delinquency of minors if you're looking for something legally to charge them with, and it needs to end. And that's all I got.
We'll pass the mic, or Mike's got it, okay. Yep.
I'm going to jump in here. There's top-heavy bureaucracies spending $20,000 per student and having such poor results because we have layer upon layer upon layer of bureaucracy we really don't need. One area of this that the auditor might be able to address is how the funds are being spent and whether they're being effective, and delivering a report about that kind of effectiveness as far as cost effectiveness and the outcome for education. But this is, well, I think we're pretty much in agreement here. What they're doing is a travesty. It needs to stop for a number of different reasons. It actually can be something that we can do up here. And I also want to address the issue of Article 22, Proposition 5. Because one of the things that's going to enshrine in the Constitution is a barrier that's now going to be erected between parents and their kids, and an unelected temporary counselor now has more influence over the kids than the parents do. And if they object to what that counselor might be saying, they can actually potentially have their child removed from their home and be shut out of any discussion. I think that's a travesty. And I encourage everyone here to really look carefully at Article 22, Proposition 5. I'm voting against it.
First thing about this incident in Randolph, I don't know a lot of all the details. I did speak to one parent a few days ago, and I'm trying desperately to find out some more facts. But the first thing I'll say is to parents, no matter who you are, no matter where you are, protect your kids. Fathers, teach your daughters to protect themselves. We have seen in Virginia 2 assaults. How many more do we need to see before we learn our lesson? I say that's too many. The other thing about the Randolph incident, I think there's a bully in the room, and I believe it's the administration. The bully, they're intimidating or attempting to intimidate the 10 young women who said they felt uncomfortable. I believe they're also bullying the transgender person, because I don't think, I'm not sure exactly the age, but I believe they're teens, possibly 14. I don't think they're doing any justice to this student by encouraging changing with biological girls. I don't know the exact situation with this transgender student, so I can't speak to that completely. The other thing I want to say, and maybe it'll get me in trouble, but I don't care. If the administration saw fit to close the locker room to 10 young women who felt uncomfortable, I think we should go a little bit further. I think we should shut the school down, fire everyone, and give the parents of all the students vouchers so they can find a school that they feel comfortable with. Too many parents feel intimidated. Don't be intimidated. That's I believe that's part of the goal. Don't be intimidated. Stand up. Find parents that agree with you and go. Don't go alone. Go with groups. Go with groups. It's your tax dollars. It's our tax dollars. We should get to decide how it's spent with our kids' education. Thank you.
Joe, and then Joe.
Can I just
Can Joe jump in first?
Good, Joe.
You know, we're seeing Title IX be destroyed right now, and we've seen some schools where the girls have been smart and just said, if this is the case, we're not going to compete. You know, as a legislature, I've got to recognize, as a state representative, we've got a supermajority right now. Our goal on November 8th is to break that supermajority so that we can start having some vetoes for the most insane stuff that's going on up in Montpelier. As I was studying what we did in legislation over the last 2 years, it's amazing how much time we wasted changing pronouns in all our legislation. Changing pronouns. That's the insanity that's going on. And we've got to take a step of breaking that supermajority so that we can get back to conservative values.
I can add just a little bit. I wasn't going to say this, but Brooke, you made me think of something. So this past Saturday, I think I mentioned I met Secretary Yellen, and this was at a Women's Economic Opportunity Forum, and she got up there to speak, and one of the main topics she was talking about was reproductive rights. And I think that kind of highlights a bigger problem that I've talked about, that the progressive far left is taken over, hijacked the Democrat Party, is running our country, and it's a leadership problem where we have someone like that focusing on not the economy and not you know, the treasury issues, but reproductive rights. So I hope that sort of thing. I was grilled on this issue yesterday on WVMT. They kept asking me. I said it's a local issue, let them resolve that. But it is actually a bigger issue of the leadership that we're getting, you know, in Washington right now, and I hope it's energizing people to get out there and vote and make a change.
Karen? I think we're going to wrap up now, Carol.
Well, I have one question.
Okay.
Okay, my question is, basically, everyone's upset about Article 22. Supposedly, that has something to do with abortion. But in Article 22, and it's a vote for everybody, Article 22 does not mention abortion. Article 22 mentions personal reproductive autonomy is central to the liberty and dignity to determine one's own life course, and shall not be denied or infringed unless justified by a compelling state interest achieved by at least restrictive means. The language is scary.
What's the question?
The question is, what does it mean?
The legislature intentionally wrote this law, or constitutional amendment, so vaguely that no one would know what it means. And when they were writing it, it's under my understanding, it was said time and time again, don't worry about it, we'll let the state Supreme Court figure out what it means. Any constitutional amendment that is written so vaguely that it has no plain, common sense reading should be ruled as being unconstitutional itself and should be null and void.
Okay, at this point, we'll start with Bill, and I'd like you all to, in a minute or two, make a final pitch for people's votes and wrap up.
Well, I won't take 2 minutes, I promise. So, as I stated before, I've been here my entire life. And that's probably the ability to meet a lot of people, make a lot of friends, and I'm in a unique position to have people from both sides of the aisle that I've worked with over the years, and I still have contacts that I can reach out to and If there's questions that I don't know the answers to from my constituents, I have a great Rolodex. Is that for, I'm old, right? So I have a great Rolodex that I can rely on to ask and hopefully move us forward. And I would appreciate if you could vote for me. I would certainly appreciate your vote today or any day between now and November 8th.
We covered a lot of ground tonight. There's a lot of tough issues that the legislature has to face in the coming years. I think one of the things I bring is a very strong backbone. I'm going to look at things. I'm not going to be afraid to say the emperor's not got clothes on here. And I think that's one of our challenges right now. We're just saying, no, it all looks okay. As I talk to people, everything looks okay in Vermont. It's not what I heard in the room here tonight. Focus on getting the economy back on track. Focus on improving safety in the state. When somebody asked me, how do I feel about the Second Amendment and how do I feel about crime in the county? I don't go to Bennington unarmed. We don't need that. We should feel safe without having to protect ourselves personally. We need our free speech back across the board. The last couple of years we've seen just one-sided conversations, and that's a lecture, that's not a conversation. We need to get back to both sides of the aisle, talking to each other, and talking about the issues and working compromise. And then finally, as my peers have talked about, we need accountability in government, and there's many, many layers that we need to just get rid of. Thank you. And if you're voting in Manchester, Arlington, Sunderland, Sandgate, I'd like your vote. Thank you.
I'm Brooke Page, and I'm from Washington, the good Washington. And I'm running for Secretary of State and State Treasurer. And understand that if I were somehow, by divine intervention, to get both of those offices, the state constitution does not prohibit me from serving in both offices. Okay? So I don't want you to think I'm just doing it on a lark here. Okay? I really want to be the Secretary of State, because in my opinion, that's where the greatest troubles are. Okay? The Treasurer's office has other issues, and if I get in there and find that maybe there's someone else that would be more skilled at that, I certainly would have the opportunity to consult with the governor and have one of the several Republican candidates who were considered but could not run because of the Hatch Act. If you don't know what that is, I can't take the time now, but I'll tell you after the thing, that they couldn't run even though they were highly qualified to serve as treasurer. Secretary of State, elections. It's Jimmy Condos' elections gone wild. I mean, nobody knows how it's working, what it's working. The only thing they could do that would even make it even worse, they're discussing, is ranked choice voting, which is like where you put your vote in a black box, they shred the ballots, and then they reach inside and try to figure out who the hell won. I talked about my opponent for treasurer, Mike Patak. My opponent for Secretary of State is Susan Copeland Hasnan. Hansis, thank you, I can't even pronounce her last name. If I have it written out, I'm good to go. And she was the one who, while in government ops, was backing all of this craziness in the elections and also in the office, changes in the office professional responsibility, including all the trouble that's now going to befall small contractors. Archives is in chaos. I do some research work up there, and the records that were in the Redstone building are so badly contaminated with black mold, you have to take Benadryl and get Benadryl cream slathered on your arms to handle the records. I mean, every aspect of the Secretary of State's office is either in chaos or has been abandoned, as I talked about earlier about education. So I ask you to consider the options and please vote for me on election day. Wait until election day. Find out what the heck's going on. Find out who the people are. Don't let Jimmy Kondo say, hey, vote early and get it out of your way. What kind of insanity is it? Our Constitution says lots of things. Two things it says. One outside my jurisdiction here. But it says that the towns are supposed to educate the children of Vermont. Not the counties, not the state, not anybody. The townspeople are responsible for building, operating the schools, and educating the children. As far as elections, it says that, what is it, section 52 and 53, I think, not only good, says that election day is the second Tuesday after the first Monday in November. If you've been convinced to do something else, okay, you've been deprived of your opportunity to have full understanding of what you should be doing and how you should vote. Thank you. My name is Brooke Page. I'm running for Treasurer and Secretary of State.
Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Rick Morton. I'm running for Auditor of the state of Vermont. I have a website. However, it's a little confusing because I got the website when I was running for Vermont Senate from Windham County. So if you got a card from me, it has the website on there. It has some more information about what I stand for, what my priorities are. But I want to be the IRS to the rest of government. So, think about that.
Thank you for coming tonight. I'm glad I was invited. I talked to my wife a couple of weeks ago and I said, you know, I've taken you on quite a few adventures. Are you ready for this one? And she said, yeah, whatever I want to do. I didn't accept this just to be a name on a ballot. I accepted this because I believe I can do this job and I want to help make Vermont a better, safer place. And I don't know how else to do it. It's to say it, law and order, public safety, that's going to be the main focus. It's not going to be the only focus, but there are a lot of people who, that's the main focus for them. They think about it, you know, like Joe said, I've talked to other people who go to Burlington, or used to, and don't anymore at all. So, thank you again for coming. My name is Michael Taglavia, and I want to be your next Attorney General.
First, I'd like to thank all of you for coming out tonight and spending some time with us during your normally busy day. Secondly, I'd like to chastise my colleagues for overdressing tonight. I have the honor... Brooke, I got a joke about that, but I'm not going to do it here. I've had the honor and the privilege of being re-elected to the Caledonia District 6 times. I have done my best to listen and to use as much common sense and brain work as I can. But I have always been led by a guiding star, which is the 18th article of Vermont's Constitution. I'd like to read that to you. It says that frequent recurrence to fundamental principles and a firm adherence to justice, moderation, temperance, industry, and frugality are absolutely necessary to preserve the blessings of liberty and keep government free. The people ought, therefore, to pay particular attention to these points in the choice of officers and representatives, and have a right, in a legal way, to exact a due and constant regard to them from their legislators and magistrates when making and executing such laws as are necessary for the good government of this state. That has been my guiding star. Now for the race. I am running against an individual who for the past 8 years has been at absolute loggerheads with our governor. I know there's a simple difference in the race I'm running that can translate to anyone who knows anything about politics. The 2 top constitutional officers in this state are the governor and the lieutenant governor. At a time when we are about to have a serious downturn in our federal revenue stream, those two offices need to be in sync. They bring protection. They bring safety. And the number one priority of government is to be protecting the citizenry. Phil Scott and I have worked together for a long time. You may not like everything he's done. You may not like everything I've done. But if you boil it all down, the choice really is David Zuckerman or me. I know some of you don't agree with certain stances I've taken. I believe I can win this race. I will win this race, but only if I have the help of everybody in this room. So even if you have to hold your nose until you're blue in the face, I would beg for you to consider giving your vote to me when you get down to that column for Lieutenant Governor. Thanks again for coming. You can find out a lot more about me at joebenning.com. Very simple place to go. Thanks again.
I never like following you, Joe, I gotta say. But, yeah, I do, I have that. So, Brian, thank you, Carol, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. This has been fantastic. I do want to take the opportunity to thank my team and all the volunteers that have been helping me in the last 10 months. I see Danny Frank in the audience and Gayon Haskins and his wife Christine from around here, but been getting a tremendous amount of help. So sort of like Joe was just saying, I'm going against a career politician, and I would ask you to take a look at his record and even his conduct and vote with your conscience. And what's in front of us, we are at a critical juncture. We've talked about it a bunch tonight. We are on an unsustainable path, and what that progressive far left has led us to is the economic and crime and drug crises that we're in. And those are the things at the forefront for Vermonters. My platform addresses those. My opponent talks about reproductive rights and insurrection and threat to democracy. Missing the boat completely on the first two. We've got a state issue and nobody's concerned about insurrection right now. That's not what Vermonters are concerned about. Threat to democracy is an issue, because what's happening here is all Vermonters and all Americans are not being represented right now. So I am going to represent all Vermonters and all Americans and make tough decisions. And I've got 42 years of demonstrated leadership and performance. I'm willing to go in and committed to go in and making the tough decisions to get us back on track as a country. My ask is, it's going to be close. But the good news is a poll came out about 3 weeks ago, Trafalgar poll, legitimate, 1,000 people plus, and I'm 6 points back, 49-43. A lot of people would say you should be 20 points back, but I'm not. I'm right there. So what I'd ask is, if you think we need to change, because we certainly do, don't go with the status quo here on this one. Don't sit this one out. Talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends, spread the word. I will represent all Vermonters. I will deliver a better future for Vermont. I don't like the future we see right now. Joe, thank you. May the 14th star shine bright. Gerald Malloy, I want to be here, serve you, and represent you as your next United States Senator. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. Can we get one more round of applause for our candidates?